This is Marc Mullinax, and I welcome you back to Power for the Peaceful, a podcast and class on Taoism. Today, verse 19. We interrupt this program.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
When despair for the world grows in me, and I awake in the middle of the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Wendell Berry.
Greetings and welcome back. Matt Buys is the other voice and our question asker this episode. Matt is, like Socrates, one who knows he knows nothing, and is thus, in my estimate, smarter than the average person. To quote Matt, "I know that I am an idiot. Therefore, I am less of an idiot than the average idiot." I've been looking forward to bringing you this verse for a long time. In this one verse, verse 19, there's this compact, powerful lens into the power and wisdom of all, and I do mean all spiritual wisdoms. So let's get into this verse. Here's my translation of verse 19, which I entitle Necessary Interruptions. Interrupt sanctified holiness and forsake sophistication. People are 100 times happier without these contrivances. Interrupt the rules of family devotion and discard those exhausting ancestral duties. People will naturally recover what family means. Interrupt cunning and forget profit. Notice how theft diminishes. These three interruptions are but a beginning. Your goal is peace in your essence. Here's what's next. Discern the simplicity of everything like raw silk. Embrace the uncomplicated and unvarnished nature of things like an uncarved block of wood. Become smart by reducing self-interest and control. Practice wise self-interruption and break the complication habit. When I was getting this translation ready for publication with Fortress Press, the editor had a single question for me on all my translation, and it focused on this verse. Are you sure, Mark, you want to use the word interruption here? I let his question interrupt me. Had I chosen the best possible verb? I relooked at the Chinese verb here, chüeh, which means to cut off, sever, to break, or terminate. Its etymological content contains the radical or governing definition sign in the Chinese character for knife. And there's also this word silk, and also in chüeh, the word for desire. So chüeh means to cut something undesirable, like a knife through silk. Now, other translations in English I felt were almost there. They use the word renounce, abandon, give up, throw away, forget about, banish, get rid of, end, do away with, drop, and forswear. These are the usual words in the English translations. The word interrupt I use is the first part of renunciation, the beginning of abandonment, and step one in throwing away, etc. However, with the idea of interruption, there's this conscious, watchful decision to pause. Look at something that is or has emerged, and then with conscious intention and wisdom, interrupt with the mindful curiosity of seeing what happens when you do. mindful interruption. Interruption with a reason, not a knee-jerk. That's why I chose and stand by my word choice. Upon this word choice will be the foundation of today's episode.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Some of you listening today will know exactly where you were on the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963, or the night of April 4th, 1968, or of June 6th, 1968, and September 11th, 2001. Those first three were the assassination moments of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy. These national days of crisis forced an interruption of our normal state of affairs. We were compelled to look inward and perhaps rediscover who we were and who we wanted to be. A pause before we returned to business as usual. Probably every one of us listening in today remembers exactly where we were the moment we got that phone call. Someone we loved was in crisis, an accident, a cancer diagnosis. We put down the phone and the ground beneath our feet is already less stable. The breath comes in thicker. Time slows down. Fortunately, rare are the times when our lives get forcefully disrupted by death, or by the phone call at 3 a.m, by that power failure, the dead car battery, the delayed flight, and now you got to reschedule everything. These are powerful moments, these interruptions. In these very moments, we're given another chance to work out one more time who we are. We've one more chance to show what we are made of, made for. One more opportunity to work out the quality of our character. Because interruptions, when seen in a spiritual sense, cast a spotlight on all we have considered, quote, important, unquote.
We think that if we just meditated enough, or jogged enough, or ate perfect food, everything would be perfect. But from the point of view of someone who is awake, that's death. Seeking security or perfection, rejoicing and feeling confirmed and whole, self-contained and comfortable is some kind of death. It doesn't have any fresh air. There's no room for something to come in and interrupt all that. We are killing the moment by controlling our experience. Pema Chodron, when things fall apart.
17 years ago, I had cancer surgery, and I am now minus a prostate. News that one has cancer is quite the interrupter. Cancer, that C word, carries with it the whiff of death. With a cancer diagnosis, one can rail against the dark like forever, or one can calm down and imagine or reimagine life anew after this memento mori, this stark, interruptive remembrance that we will die. That's not news to anybody, is it? Because death, when rightly anticipated as the ultimate interruption, leads to gratitude for what has been, and perhaps, I hope, a reorientation of how to live the remainder of one's too short life. I like to think of these interruptions I just mentioned are the karma that we need for that moment, a kind of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear moment. I'm not saying everyone needs a cancer diagnosis or a national emergency to see the value of life, but when the crises do come, we have a teachable moment to reflect. Just how healthy was our normal lives? Just how aware have I been living? Exactly what does our world need to be hearing anew in this moment of crisis? So my mission in this episode is to highlight another kind of interruption, an intentional one. And that is fully within the scope of this Chinese word chüeh. If you are religious, call it holy interruption. If you're not religious, call it we interrupt this programming. What do I mean? Without waiting for the inevitable delay, that inevitable phone call, the cancer diagnosis, we can practice every day with great intention getting our programming interrupted by almost anything and everything. And if we practice this like an athlete or a musician will practice every day, we find that to prepare for interruptions is to prepare for and welcome beauty. What might this mean? First of all, this means seeing our lives, our programmed to the teeth, multi-screened, multitasked lives as needing interruption, maybe all the time. Our interrupting clients, family, students, and that guy who cut us off on the way here this morning are holy. Even our enemies are holy, maybe especially our enemies. We can actually pause and choose to see these disruptions as sacred moments. Oh, we may not enjoy these moments, and we may grind our inner teeth to sharp edges when someone disrupts us. But what if these inevitable interruptions are precisely our karma? Exactly what we need at the time. What if getting cut off in traffic or having to spend some extra time with that problematic someone is actually what we are in need of, like patience and compassion? What if our enemies who oppose us are, in a softer view, our teachers, indirect angels from God, seeing if I will learn the lesson I could stand to learn at that holy moment? So, first takeaway, we are interrupted all the time, and this, I believe, is good news.
The great thing, if one can, is to stop regarding all the unpleasant things as interruptions of one's own or real life. The truth is, of course, that what one calls the interruptions are precisely one's real life, the life God is sending one day by day. C.S. Lewis.
Secondly, we can build these holy interruptions into our schedules, moments of intentional disruption that regularly remind us of who we are and what we're doing. You don't have to be religious to do this, but each major world faith has a critical ritual of holy interruption. These are non-ordinary times in which the faithful are urged to do things differently or even do nothing. Why? To understand living from a different point of energy. Judaism has the constant interruption called Sabbath, a once-a-week day for the faithful to radically remember origins and destiny. Christianity adds Lent to the Sabbath to interrupt regularly, enabling a focus on deeper and different matters. East and South Asian religions practice doing nothing, we call it meditation, to become mindful about our mindless conditioning. Muslims interrupt their daily lives with prayer 5 times a day, fast during Ramadan. Now, if every religion has its holy interrupter, then what about those of us who call ourselves spiritual but not religious? What will we do?
At root, a pearl is a disturbance, a beauty caused by something that isn't supposed to be there, about which something needs to be done. It is the interruption of the status quo that creates beauty. Beauty is a response to provocation, to intrusion. The pearl's beauty is made as a result of insult. Julia Cameron, author of The Artist's Way.
We can learn from the spiritual traditions of our world that interruptions are our beauty-bringing friends. Seeing cancer as a lens through which you see the world leads to the beauty of compassion, to mindful gratitude for what actually is. That there's this different clock ticking, a different calendar to follow, a different perspective than the one always assumed. Their messages, we become more in tune with the sacred when we build into our programming intentional moments of interruption and opportunity to stop, reflect, give thanks for what is, to embrace the holy necessity of the holy now, to practice compassion. This is because we can stop living in Chronos time all the time and start living by Kairos, living in the right time. I know people who do a weekly digital Sabbath. No Wi-Fi, no phone calls, no computer, no smart watch, once a week. To a person, they testify that their lives may not be simpler, but they do feel more in touch with their lives and their loved ones. The power of well thought out and well-timed interruptions on one day, I think, influences the quality, for the better, of all the other days.
The most fundamental aggression to ourselves, the most fundamental harm we can do to ourselves, is to remain ignorant by not having the courage and the respect to look at ourselves honestly and gently. Pema Chodron, when things fall apart.
Now, we usually don't like it when someone like Martin Luther King Jr. holds up a mirror to society and says in an interrupting way, "I have a dream," to disrupt this American nightmare. King interrupted business as usual in both black and white communities and got us to reimagine who we are. Most agree that we are better off for King's interruption, as difficult as it still is for many of us. But that's our karma for this moment. And I guarantee beauty if you keep on keeping on. Well, that was then. But what about now? What do you see today needing a holy interruption? What program is running in the deep background that could use a little creative power failure? The American Empire? Or our hardened prejudices against those who don't speak, worship, eat, or live the way we're used to? What do you see? I can't see for you. What needs a little holy interruption? Where could you plant a garden of beauty and righteousness in a desert of oppression? We can become interrupting monkey wrenches in the gummed-up works down at the local government, over at the local prison, up at the local health care facility. But you can see where this is going. You get to finish today's episode, not me. If you have free will, you can rise above the conditioning, the naysayers, the "we've never done it like this before" groupthink, and all that numbing programming, and just say, no. Wait, not today, not on my watch, not in this life, no longer. I don't think so. Just create a holy space to say no or wait is enough.
A poem is an interruption of silence, whereas prose is a continuation of noise. Billy Collins.
Homework time. Today, test out the thesis that we are indeed made for free choice, fully intentional interruptions. I invite you to break a couple of small habits, alter the order in which you put on your clothes or brush your teeth, just for kicks, but notice the difference, the different rhythm, and then move on to a new way to get to work. Take the bus, get lost, carpool, start eating with your other hand, listen and don't talk. Soon you'll start wondering, just how far can I go? And maybe you'll be getting other interrupters to work on a tougher problem. Together, you bring holy interruption to soften a difficult, thick place or write a new story of justice. Who knows? Maybe you'll share that story right here one day soon. It starts small. This afternoon, tonight, find some small interrupting event in your own life. Pray at a strange time. Walk instead of drive. Silent that temptation to talk. Unplug that TV. You know you've wanted to. Eat differently, read more dangerously, park your electronic go-to devices for 24 hours. Stop, refuse, interrogate, release, soften, give in, give up. Just clean the mental filters. You'll be astonished at the fresh air that gets in.
No poem is worth anything unless it starts from a poetic trance, out of which you can be awakened by interruption as from a dream. In fact, it is the same thing. Robert Graves.
Each of us can identify some habit of thought, habit of mind, habit of heart, habit of schedule, habit to stay the boredom. that you could give a 24-hour rest. And in that 24 hours, I bet that you come to a new realization about what is important. I mean, to have a healthy garden, you have to interrupt the weeds. That's what I'm talking about. What needs weeding out? Beauty is there, awaiting our recognition when we just see, hear, consider, or love differently.
Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Rumi.
Finally, the beginning of beauty is the interruption of ugliness. The beginning of justice is the interruption of injustice. The beginning of uncommon wisdom is the interruption of common wisdom. Today's episode has been brought to you by the words stop, refuse, no, interrogate, surrender, soften, release. Practice being the weed-interrupting gardener who clears the ground so that beauty emerges. Everybody has wholesome and unwholesome qualities in the mind. Learning to interrupt the unwholesome qualities is meditation. Meditation is this verse's call to us. Finally, let's rehear this verse. Interrupt sanctified holiness and forsake sophistication. People are 100 times happier without these contrivances. Interrupt the rules of family devotion and discard those exhausting ancestral duties. People will naturally recover what family means. Interrupt cunning and forget profit. Notice how theft diminishes. These 3 interruptions are but a beginning. Your goal is peace in your essence. And here's what's next. Discern the simplicity of everything like raw silk. Embrace the uncomplicated and unvarnished nature of things like an uncarved block of wood. Become smart by reducing self-interest and control. Practice wise self-interruption and break the complication habit. You see, our lives become comfortable, conditioned, and it seems that we should stay ignorant and thus blissful about our ignorance of what is. Every present moment has been conditioned by past energies and karma, but we can interrupt any present moment or energy. We can choose our awareness and choose to interrupt old programming because wisdom has free will. Make your world safe for interruptions. And now Matt's question.
When I was on Shongobofi, Second Mesa, where the Hopi live, I was lucky enough to witness a sacred ceremony, and right in the middle of it, these mudheads, what they called mudheads, these clowns came out with mud and charcoal, and they just smeared it over all the people who are acting a little high and mighty. Anybody dressed nice, and in fact, I even had to run away because they were trying to get me too. And so my question is, why didn't our church have that? And then as I thought about it, I guess to formalize it more, how do we institutionalize interruptions without betraying the spirit of interruptions?
Matt, thanks so much. Simple answer is that we don't or rarely want to interrupt. We are so afraid of hurting nice people's feelings. I remember back in the 60s when the 4 young African-American men quietly entered a Greensboro, North Carolina Woolworths, sat down at the lunch counter, and calmly ordered their hamburgers. It became national news, but boy, I remember a lot of the good, nice, respectable, religious people who did not appreciate this radical interruption. They were not amused. So my fellow tricksters and lovers of good trouble, your interruptions will be misunderstood, and feelings will be hurt. But this is no reason to stop your interruptive measures, because you see, there's this fatal flaw in our religions that are entirely built upon a text, a written text. I remember the text of my faith being held aloft, literally and figuratively, as the highest authority possible, especially when translated by one class of people, seminary-trained men. And their translations ever and always somehow excluded women, people of color, non-binary people, and misfits of every stripe, because such good folk were, by their lives, living interruptions of smooth and centuries-old interpretations of our written texts, readings that ignored over half the people in the congregations. A written text, you see, takes a rich oral tradition of a spiritual path and, in the year that it writes down its scriptures, actually freezes what should remain fluid. Now, our scriptures are great ways to record how people long ago worshipped and felt, but to try to bring these ancient rituals and understandings into our present day, especially in translation, is to force-fit the scriptures into a Procrustean bed of one or precious few understandings. But when that happens, the humor is gone. The spontaneity or giran we saw in verse 17 evaporates. Orthodoxy takes its place. Right actions become narrow and scrutinized for uniformity of belief. In fact, right belief becomes more important than right action. Into such a compromised spiritual ecosystem, for a clown or a trickster or a new spirit to come and trouble the waters of that spiritual community is too disruptive, too unbelievable, and people's feelings get hurt, or worse, they get defensive when disruption interrupts. So spiritual traditions that are written down are hard to interrupt. However, spiritual traditions with lively oral traditions, whose rituals and faith understandings continue to evolve naturally, are more predisposed to holy interruptions. Matthew asks, can you institutionalize disruptions? Today I say no. Disruptions and interruptions have to be and ever remain free. You cannot legislate such freedoms. They have to be chosen by some misfit in order to bring their disruptive power. So all those interrupting rituals I spoke about just a few minutes ago, prayers, pilgrimages, fast meditations, they can become worthless if or when those who engage in them expect nothing new. It's the expectation of something brand new that's key. Because what we look for, we find. What we don't expect or look for remains forever hidden. I'm being very pessimistic, I know. I hope you'll write to me, folks, and tell me how wrong I am. Interrupt my thinking, please. This podcast is an original labor of love, designed, written, and co-produced by many whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching is good news for today. Tao still speaks and interrupts. Matt Byes gave voice to our quotes and question this week. Audrey Davis is our esteemed artist. Molly Hartwell sings her haunting song, Put Your Roots Down. Fortress Press holds the copyright for quotations from my Tao Te Ching translation. Thank you for your attendance in this class on Taoism. May your days begin in peace and become interrupting wombs for radical hope.
Are you listening?